Duncan's joining us now. He's a security analyst. He's an expert in international terrorism. He's a journalist as well. Duncan, you're very welcome to talkTV. Thanks for joining us early. What do you make of this?
Well, you know, it's a complicated one in many ways, because I think the real fear with Daniel Khalife was that he had managed to get connections that might have been able to spirit him out of the country. And certainly there was, apologies for that, there was, sorry, I will get rid of that. So the real concern there was that he might have been able to use some criminal connections to get in the back of a lorry and perhaps spirit himself out of the country. And that's why so much concentration was being done on trying to get him on checks at border posts in Dover in particular, but also elsewhere. However, overnight, the major development was that there was a lot of air traffic, helicopters up around Chiswick, and it seems that the police had an intelligence lead that had taken them to the Chiswick area from the last sighting of him, which was around the Wandsworth roundabout, where we assume that he came out from underneath the lorry, where he managed to stay underneath with those straps that the police later found. And somehow he's managed to get from Wandsworth to Chiswick, but really that isn't that far, and that must be a huge relief to police who feared he had got further afield.
Yes, indeed, and there were all these kind of worries that he was out of the country, that he was perhaps spirited away. We know there are alleged links, not proven, but alleged links to Iran as well. In terms of the fact that he got out, the prison service themselves have said that they think it was pre-planned in some way, that he might have had some help and so on. For counter-terror experts, for security services and so on, there'll be a lot that will, I'm sure, never be told about this. But what do you think in terms of the fact that he escaped and then 3 days later he's been found? Will that be seen as a victory?
It will. I mean, there were several things counting against Daniel Khalife in this runaway attempt. And the main one was that he didn't have any money. So that was going to hamper him in getting very far. So it all really depended on how well planned the escape was. And police were telling me certainly that they believed he had planned it. There was no way that he could have got those straps under the lorry on the spur of the moment. That was something that he'd planned. But it appears that his plan for what to do once he had escaped was less well formed, and that of course is a kind of a relief to the security services, because had he managed to plan that better, perhaps get hold of some money or a contact that could have put him in a lorry, he could have got quite far quite quickly, and he could have been either in the UK, away from London where everyone's looking for him, or perhaps abroad. So it's not the first time that somebody hasn't quite thought through their escape plan, but it's certainly there'll certainly be some gratitude in the security services that that's what happened.
Just tell us, Duncan, from your experience as a security analyst, an expert in international terrorism, and someone who's covered these stories a lot, I want you to just talk us through what will happen now. Presumably he'll be questioned about what had happened. What sort of incentive is there for him to tell the truth about who was helping him and so on? Because clearly, even though he was on remand, he hasn't been convicted of anything yet, he shouldn't have broken out. That's against the law. There's a sort of quite complex legal aspect here, to say nothing of the security aspect and the fact that he is someone who was in the army. He allegedly was breaking the Official Secrets Act and so on. I mean, this is a complex case, isn't it? And it's been made even more complicated because of his escape on Wednesday morning.
It is a complex case, and it will now go to court, and he'll now be facing two different charges. First of all, the three charges he was originally facing under the Official Secrets Act, and for collecting information useful to an enemy, which appears to be, according to the charges, was some personnel details of his colleagues in the Royal Signals Regiment, and for placing a fake device on a desk in his barracks. Now, it's difficult to know how serious those charges are.
That was allegedly a fake bomb, wasn't it?
It was allegedly a fake bomb, exactly, but not a real device. And it's difficult to know how serious those charges are until we get into the detail of it and he gives his side of the story. But he'll now also face separate charges related to his escape from prison. And so how the legal process deal with that, whether they put it into one trial or deal with it in two separate trials, he is likely to face the first allegations initially, and then the courts will deal with the second one later on. But he does, have the option of pleading guilty at this stage, but he obviously may want to contest the charges, and that seems to be what he was planning to do because there was a trial listed for November. So the legal process will now have to get underway, and that will mean certain restrictions on what can be said in terms of background. But I think what we can say at this stage, I spoke to a family member yesterday who was very concerned about what had happened to Daniel Khalife during his time with the army, or particularly towards the end of his time in the army. And they said specifically that he was a very enthusiastic member of the army initially, and something they felt had gone wrong during his time serving.
Interesting. So there could have been some. We will need to be really careful. Obviously, this is the subject of an upcoming court case, but there were concerns expressed by that family. Just to say, folks, if you just tuned in, if you just heard the news, Daniel Khalife, the terror suspect, has been arrested. He's been found by police. The Metropolitan Police have confirmed he was caught in Chiswick in West London just before 11 o'clock this morning. So he's been back in custody for about an hour. He's currently in custody, as we know. We're going to talk to a former Detective Chief Inspector at the Metropolitan Police, Peter Kirkham, as well as staying on with our current guest, Duncan Gardham, who's a security analyst, expert in international terrorism, and a journalist as well. Duncan, just tell us a little bit more about that interview. It's in the Times this morning. Absolutely fascinating. You spoke to a relative of Daniel Khalife yesterday, and it's in the Times today. It's a fascinating interview. I think everybody should read it if you can. Just tell us a little bit more about what they thought and what their fears and concerns and what they told you about Daniel.
So they were very concerned about him and emphasised what a nice and genuine kid he was. And in fact, that is reflected really in some of the interviews I've done with some of his schoolmates. He left school at 16 to join the army, but before that, he wasn't the most academic of students, but he wasn't a dislikable person either, and was described as a bit of a loner. But the family friend said, actually, beneath all that, sort of perhaps individual approach, he was quite a clever guy, but was struggling perhaps with some issues that meant that he hadn't managed to follow through on his academic career despite his mother's wishes. And he had then joined the army, but he kind of found himself in the army, and the sense of direction that he'd lacked before then seemed to come to the fore in the army. And as you said, I think early on as well, we got clarified that his family he has an Iranian and Lebanese background, his father being originally Lebanese and his mother being brought up in Iran. But the family are in no way supportive of the Iranian regime, and so any allegations of spying for the Iranians, I would expect him probably to contest in court, and that seems to have been his plan.
What's your assessment of those allegations, Duncan, as someone who's in touch with the security services, someone who knows this area?
Well, it's difficult for me to sort of pass judgment on a court case that is...
Sure, it's ongoing. We need to be careful, absolutely, yeah.
That is coming up. The charges are not brought lightly, of course, especially against a serving soldier, as he was then. And so the CPS and counter-terrorism police, and indeed the army who he was serving for, will have jointly made an assessment that the evidence was strong enough to merit a prosecution. But there are always two sides to a story, and he has a defence case to put, and that will be listened to in due course by a jury. And as I said earlier, I think it was due to be heard in November at Woolwich Crown Court. Whether that fixture will remain or not, we'll see.
Duncan, I know you're going to stay with us over the break, and I appreciate that. Duncan Gardham is a security analyst, expert in international terrorism as well. We're also going to be talking in just a minute, not just to Duncan, but to Peter Kirkham, who's a former Detective Chief Inspector in the Metropolitan Police, reacting to that breaking news, major breaking news in the last hour. A terrorist suspect, Daniel Khalife, he's been arrested by police. He's been found in Chiswick after his escape from Wandsworth Prison. That was on Wednesday. The police have found him. He's back in custody. More on this and your reaction to this major breaking news.